never believed in monsters, not the kind you see in movies, not the kind used to scare children into obedience. I believed in men with guns, improvised explosives, and the kind of evil that walks upright and speaks your language. That's what I was trained for. But nothing could have prepared me for what we saw in Kandahar. My name is Dan Willard. I served as a Special Forces operator with the U.S. Army in Afghanistan in 2002. I've always carried the weight of that deployment differently from others. Not because of the firefights or the men we lost, but because of something I still can't explain. Something I buried deep for nearly 2 decades. Until now. It started with a missing patrol. In early August, the team from Echo Platoon went radio silent near a series of caves in the mountains of Kandahar province. At first, everyone thought it was a comms failure. Then we found their Humvees, doors open. Supplies intact, weapons scattered, no bodies. It was like they had simply vanished. Poof, into thin air. Colonel Harwood briefed us that morning. We were being sent into the mountains to find Echo Platoon. Simple as that. Find our boys, bring them home, or what was left of them. My team, 6 of us, was composed of seasoned veterans. Ramirez, our communications guy, Smith, the sniper, Ellis and Tucker, close quarters combat experts, Henderson, our medic, and me. We were all uneasy, and not just because of the mission. There was a strange energy in the room, like we were stepping into something we didn't understand. I didn't know then that this would be the last time some of us would see daylight. The air got thinner as we climbed. Kandahar's mountains are jagged and unforgiving, bone-dry rocks that crumble under your boots, cliffs that seem to shift when you aren't looking. The temperature plummeted at night. It was like walking on the edge of another world. We hiked for almost 2 days with minimal rest. Nothing but endless cliffs and echoing silence. No signs of enemy activity. No signs of Echo Platoon. Just an oppressive stillness. Then around dusk on the 2nd day, we found something strange. It was Henderson who spotted it first. An odd pile of rocks stacked like a crude monument near the mouth of a narrow ravine. It wasn't natural. The stones were too evenly placed, some of them too large for any one man to lift alone. "What the hell is that?" Ellis muttered, raising his rifle. I walked up and placed a hand on the stones. Cold. Not just from the air, but wrong. Like they held no warmth at all. "I've seen Taliban markers before," Ramirez said. "This ain't that." We pressed on. The ravine narrowed, the walls rising like jaws around us. Our radios started to crackle with static. At first, we thought it was interference from the rocks, but then we heard the voices. It was faint, like whispers, just outside the range of comprehension. Low, murmuring tones that faded as quickly as they came. We stopped dead. "Ramirez, you picking that up?" I asked. He fiddled with his gear. "I've got nothing but static. You guys hear that too?" We all nodded. Smith, our sniper, knelt and surveyed the path ahead through his scope. "There's something up there," he said quietly. "About 100 meters. In the shadows. Big." "Big like what?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just lowered the scope and shook his head. We moved forward slowly, weapons raised. The ravine opened up into a small basin littered with bones. Not animal bones, human. Dozens of them, some crushed, some broken clean in half. And then we saw the cave. A massive black maw carved into the side of the cliff, as if something had punched a hole straight into the mountain. The bones were densest around the entrance, and something inside the cave was breathing. I swear to God, we all heard it. Deep, guttural breaths echoing out into the night. "What the fuck is this?" Tucker whispered. "Could be a bear," Henderson offered weakly. "Not unless Afghan bears have started stacking skulls," Ellis said, pointing to a pile of craniums near the entrance. We didn't go in. Not then. Instead, we marked the location, radioed back what little we could, and set up camp a mile away to regroup. That night, none of us slept. We took turns on watch, but even off duty, I could feel eyes on us. Something out there was moving through the darkness. Something that didn't make noise like an animal would. Something deliberate. At 0330 hours, Ramirez's scream shattered the stillness. We scrambled from our tents, weapons at the ready. Ramirez was gone. No blood, no struggle. Just his rifle lying on the ground and a set of enormous footprints leading back toward the cave. We didn't wait. We didn't hesitate. We went after Ramirez. The footprints leading away from the camp were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Deep, wide, and abnormally spaced. Whatever made them wasn't walking. It was striding. Long, powerful gaits that crushed stones underfoot like they were nothing. None of us spoke as we followed the trail. The silence of the night was broken only by our breathing and the crunch of our boots. I glanced at Henderson. He was sweating despite the cold. Smith's hands trembled as he gripped his rifle tighter. Tucker was muttering to himself. We all knew we were walking into something wrong, something far beyond IEDs and insurgents. The trail led back toward the ravine, the same path where we'd seen the strange rock pile. Only this time, there was no pile. Just a dark, gaping opening in the rock wall that hadn't been there before. The cave. None of us wanted to be the first to step in. I took the lead. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The beam seemed absorbed by the stone, like it didn't want us to see. The temperature dropped as we went deeper. The air grew thick, damp, metallic. The walls were strange, rough in some places, polished smooth in others. Patterns etched in the rock, swirls, spirals, claw marks. And the smell, God, the smell. Rot, ancient rot, not like a fresh corpse. This was the kind of decay that had festered for centuries. It clung to the air, to our skin like a sickness. About 20 meters in, the passage opened into a vast chamber. That's when we saw it. A mountain of bones. Human bones, skulls, rib cages. Femurs snapped in half like twigs. Some of them were still wearing tattered uniforms, American. Others were older, rotted to the point of disintegration. And then came the sound, low, guttural, breathing. From the darkness ahead, something shifted. I raised my rifle and aimed the light. That's when it stepped into view. A massive humanoid figure, easily 12 to 15 feet tall, hunched and monstrous. Its skin was deep reddish brown, almost like rusted leather stretched taut over stone-like muscle. Its limbs were thick and corded, with arms longer than its legs, built like a beast meant to rip, not run. Its eyes glowed faintly, a dim orange, reflecting light like an animal's at night. And its hair, long, matted, red, flowed from its head and down its back like a mane. It blinked. It saw us, and it roared. The sound hit us like a physical force. Smith fired first. A sharp crack from his rifle echoed through the chamber. I saw the bullet hit, dead center in the chest, but the thing barely flinched. "It charged down!" I yelled. Tucker opened up with full auto fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the chamber like a strobe. The giant was fast, impossibly fast for its size. It moved like it had done this before, like it hunted in these caves. It swiped at Smith. The impact launched him into the wall. I heard the crack, bones breaking. Ellis screamed and lobbed a grenade. The explosion was deafening, echoing in the chamber. Dust and blood filled the air. I couldn't see, just heard gunfire, screams, something slamming into rock. When the dust settled, it was down. The giant was sprawled on its back, blood pooling around it, thick and black. One eye was blown out. Its chest was riddled with bullets. Tucker had emptied an entire mag into its skull. It twitched once, then lay still. Silence. We stood over it, gasping for breath. Covered in dust and blood, I looked around. Smith was dead, neck broken. Henderson was crouched next to Ellis, who was barely breathing. Tucker was shaking. "What the fuck is this thing?" Henderson whispered. I had no words. None of us did. The creature's body steamed in the cold cave air. I stepped forward and shined my light across its torso. Embedded in its side was a spearhead, old, rusted, handmade. The kind you'd expect from a Bronze Age tomb, not a living creature. "Take photos," I said hoarsely. "Record everything. This is getting out." We collected what we could. Dog tags, weapon fragments, tissue samples. Tucker took dozens of photos on his field camera. I bagged the spearhead, and then we made the call to extract. But we knew this wouldn't be a normal debrief. We had just found something that shouldn't exist, and worse, it knew we were coming. We dragged what was left of Ellis and Smith back through the cave, leaving behind a trail of blood and ash. Ellis was barely conscious, mumbling things none of us could understand. Smith was dead, neck bent at a grotesque angle. The creature's corpse took all of us to move. Even dead, it was heavy beyond reason. Its limbs dragged behind us, leaving black smears along the stone. Henderson tied a rope around its upper torso, and we took turns pulling it. My hands blistered from the effort, and every inch felt like dragging a mountain. When we finally emerged from the cave, sunlight stabbed our eyes. We had been inside longer than we thought. It was already afternoon. Tucker collapsed, coughing. "We need evac, now!" Our radios still hissed static, but as we climbed higher into the ridge, the signal kicked in. I keyed the mic. "This is Fire Team Alpha. We have a package. We need dust off. Location, Grid 7, Alpha Kilo, 2 KIA. 1 critical. Respond." The silence lasted too long. Then, "Copy that, Alpha. Blackbird inbound. 15 minutes. Be ready." But something felt wrong. The voice wasn't one of ours. 15 minutes later, the helicopter came. Fast, low, and silent. Not a standard army chopper. It was black, sleek, and unmarked. No numbers, no insignia. The kind of bird you only heard about in rumors. It hovered just above the ground, kicking up a storm of dust. The ramp dropped. Men in black tactical suits stepped out. Their gear was pristine, faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They didn't speak. They didn't ask names. They just looked at the body. One of them nodded once. The rest moved in perfect sync, lifting the giant's corpse like it weighed nothing and loading it onto the aircraft. Tucker stepped forward. "Hey, who the hell are you guys?" No answer. He turned to me. "Dan, this doesn't feel right," I agreed. Every instinct screamed at me that we were giving something up, something we shouldn't. The man who seemed in charge approached us. His face was still hidden by the visor, but his voice was sharp and cold. "You will say nothing about what you saw," he said. "We lost men in there," Henderson snapped. "They deserve answers. Your mission is classified. You were ambushed. You recovered no bodies. No enemy contact was made. That's the official version." "Bullshit!" Tucker yelled. "You think we're gonna pretend this didn't happen?" The man didn't flinch. "And if you speak about it, none of you will live long enough to regret it." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a folder, blacked out documents with my name stamped on the front. It wasn't a report, it was a threat. They took the body, left us with silence, and disappeared into the sky like ghosts. We were flown back to base later that day, so not on the same helicopter. A standard Army Chinook met us an hour later. When we landed, we were met by men in suits. Not brass, not Pentagon. Just men. They took our weapons, our gear, our notes. Tucker resisted. They sedated him. I was led into an unmarked room, no windows. 1 chair, 1 table. A man with a receding hairline and a voice like gravel sat across from me. "You're lucky, Willard," he said. "Most people who see what you saw don't get the choice." I said nothing. "You're going to go home. You'll be medically discharged. PTSD. Makes sense, right? I stared at him. And if I don't? He smiled faintly. You'll disappear, just like the others. That night, I was flown out of Kandahar. 1 week later, I was discharged on psychological grounds. Honorable, no questions. Tucker and Henderson vanished from the military rolls. Ellis died in surgery. Smith's body was never recovered. I went home, but I never escaped. The nightmares started a week later, and the breathing, the same low echoing inhale and exhale. I still heard it when I closed my eyes. The official story says Echo Platoon was lost in an ambush. There was no mention of caves, no mention of giants, no mention of the dead thing we dragged from the mountain. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't the only one. When I got back stateside, I wasn't greeted with fanfare. No medals, no processions, just silence. A medical officer handed me a discharge packet, told me to rest and heal, and that was it. I was 31 years old, a combat-hardened Special Forces operator, and now I was just some guy. The first few weeks were a blur. I stayed with my brother in Colorado, tried to adjust, tried to be normal, but normal had died in that cave. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the giant's face, the way its remaining eyes stared at me as we dragged it into the light. Not rage, not pain, recognition, like it knew me, and worse, like it was waiting for something. I tried therapy, sat in a beige room with a VA counselor who smelled like hand sanitizer and pretended to care. I told him I had recurring dreams about caves and giants. He wrote down mythological dissociation and upped my prescription. Didn't matter. The dreams got worse, and then the visits began. It started with Tucker. He called me one night at 2:46 a.m. I'll never forget the number because I stared at the clock in the darkness for hours after. Dan, he whispered over the line. They're watching me. Who? I don't know. They drive these black vans. Never get out. Just sit across the street, same van, every night, no plates. You sure it's not your nerves, man? There was a long silence. They know what we saw. They know we remember. Click. He hung up. I tried calling him back. No answer. I never heard from him again. A week later, I drove to his last known address in Arizona. The house was empty, abandoned. No forwarding address, mail stacked up by the door. It looked like he had just walked out. I filed a report with the local police. 2 days later, 2 men in suits knocked on my door. Mr. Willard, one of them said, smiling too wide. We'd appreciate it if you stopped digging into Sergeant Tucker's whereabouts. Who are you? The other man showed me a badge I didn't recognize. No agency name, just an eagle in a triangle, black on silver. You were discharged, weren't you? He said. For PTSD? Yeah. Then maybe you're remembering things wrong. They left without another word. I moved out of my brother's house that night, bought a cabin in Montana with what was left of my savings and VA check. Secluded. No neighbors. No roads for miles. I wanted silence. But I didn't get silence. The breathing came back. It started at night. Soft at first, like someone asleep at the far end of the room. But then it got louder. Closer. I searched the entire cabin with my pistol drawn. Nothing. Then the whispers started. Not in my head. Outside the cabin, around 3 a.m. every night. They weren't English. Weren't any language I recognized. A mix of guttural clicks and something that sounded almost ancient. And always after the whispers, the rustling in the woods. Twigs snapping. Heavy steps. Every instinct told me not to go outside, but one night I did. I stepped out onto the porch, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. The trees were still. Then the beam of my flashlight caught something. A figure, tall, red hair, pale eyes, standing just beyond the tree line watching. It wasn't the same giant, and I knew that. This one was taller, leaner, covered in something like tattered robes. Then it smiled. Not human, too many teeth. A grin that stretched wrong. I fired. The light flickered, and the figure vanished, just gone. I stayed up the rest of the night, every light on, pistol shaking in my hand. The next morning, I found footprints in the snow. Long, deep, like the ones in Kandahar, only barefoot, and right below my bedroom window. That was the moment I knew it wasn't over. The cave hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. The message came at 2:14 a.m. It was an email, no sender, no subject, just a set of coordinates, somewhere in Afghanistan, in the mountains west of Kandahar, and a single phrase, "They're waking up." I stared at the screen for hours. That same cold pressure I felt in the cave all those years ago filled my chest again. I should have ignored it. I wanted to. But part of me knew this wasn't over, not even close. 2 weeks later, I was back in the Middle East, not as a soldier, as a ghost. I cashed out everything, burned my name, used old contacts from my days in the service to get across the border. No badge, no orders, just grit, instinct, and a dull pain behind my eyes that hadn't left since I saw that thing smile in the woods. The mountains hadn't changed, but something else had. The villages nearby were abandoned, not bombed, not destroyed, just empty. Livestock roamed free, doors hung open, food sat rotting on tables, like everyone got up in the middle of dinner and walked away. I spent 3 days trekking toward the coordinates. The higher I climbed, the worse it got. Dead birds littered the cliffs, cracked eggs in nests that looked melted. Trees twisted unnaturally, their trunks bent into spirals like something massive had pushed past them. And that's when I heard it again, that breathing. Low, rhythmic, like the earth itself was alive. I followed the sound through a narrow pass. The rocks here were redder than the rest, fresh, new, like the mountain had split open. At the end of the trail, I saw it. A hole. Not a cave this time. A perfect, circular shaft in the ground, about 10 feet wide, descending straight into blackness. The edges were smooth, not natural. This had been made. I dropped a flare. It fell for 6 seconds before hitting the bottom. The light flickered across something massive, moving. Then came the scream, not human, not animal, but something ancient. It echoed up the shaft, and I swear it shook the rocks. I backed away, fast, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, pistol raised. A man stood at the edge of the trees, half in shadow. Dirty coat, beard to his chest. Barefoot. It was Henderson, or what was left of him. His eyes were sunken, glassy, skin stretched tight over bone. He smiled when he saw me, but his teeth, they looked wrong. Too sharp, too perfect. "Dan!" he rasped. I lowered my gun, stunned. "Henderson? Jesus, I thought you were dead?" "No, not dead." He tilted his head. "They showed me." "Showed you what?" His eyes rolled back for a second, and when they came down, they were black, pure obsidian, like staring into a void. "The sleepers are stirring," he whispered. "You opened the door. You led them back." "I didn't," I began, but he was already walking toward me. "Come see," he said, pointing toward the hole. I stepped back. No chance in hell. Something in his face twisted then, like rage bubbling under skin that didn't belong to him. He let out a sound, low and unnatural. His jaw unhinged slightly like a snake. I could see bone stretching behind his gums. That wasn't Henderson. Not anymore. I fired. Twice. The first round hit his chest. The second, his shoulder. He didn't fall, just smiled. Then he turned and vanished into the trees like smoke. I ran. Didn't stop until I was back in the foothills. Didn't sleep that night, barely breathed. The next morning, the hole was gone, vanished. like it had never existed, just smooth rock where it had been. But I remembered, and I wasn't alone. A week later, I was back in the States. But now, I knew the truth. The thing in Kandahar wasn't an isolated incident. It was one of many, and they weren't just buried. They were being woken up. When I got back to the States, I couldn't sit still. Every quiet moment felt like it was building towards something, like I was watching the last calm breath before the storm. The vision of that shaft, the memory of Henderson's black eyes haunted every second. So I started digging. Not into caves this time, into records, books, archives, military logs, declassified files, anything that smelled like shadow work. I didn't trust the internet, too many digital traps. I used paper, microfilm, old contacts who still owed me favors. And I found things. Terrifying things. The Kandahar incident wasn't unique, not even rare. It was part of something ancient, a war humanity fought so long ago, we forgot we lost. One file stood out. It was dated 1943, hand-typed, stamped with a German eagle, partially translated by Allied intelligence. It described a giant captured in the mountains of Iran by Nazi scouts. The document claimed it stood 12 feet tall, had crimson hair, and eyes that glowed in the dark. Sound familiar? The Germans called it Der Blutengel, the Blood Angel. They kept it alive for 6 days in an underground lab before it escaped. The report ended with the words, "It speaks an unknown language. It dreams while awake, and it knows we are afraid." There were more. A Soviet dig in the Ural Mountains uncovered a fossilized skeleton over 14 feet long, humanoid. Giant. Its skull had 3 eye sockets. That file was labeled N9GRUB. Buried deep in Vatican archives, smuggled out by a friend of a friend, was a scroll fragment believed to be part of the Book of Enoch. It mentioned creatures called Nephilim, said to be the children of fallen angels and mortal women. Giants, tyrants, eaters of flesh. Sounded like mythology. Until I found a satellite photo from 1982 showing a heat signature in the Hindu Kush, roughly the size of a 2-story building, human-shaped. It hit me then. This wasn't about one creature. This was a containment effort, a slow, careful war against something buried beneath our very feet. And it had been going on for thousands of years. I called an old friend, Marcus Doyle, former Delta, now worked in private intel. We met at a bar in northern Idaho, quiet place with more beer than questions. He looked worse than I remembered, pale, jittery, missing 2 fingers. "You digging into the Kandahar thing again?" he asked, eyes darting. I nodded. "I've seen them too." "What?" "In Bosnia. 5. Special mission. We hit a bunker the Serbs had run off into the woods. Intel said they were hiding weapons." He paused. "They weren't hiding weapons. They were hiding from something. They called it the Strigo. Said it only came at night. Ripped through concrete, left behind bones and hair." He pulled a photo from his coat. A single red strand, long, coarse, thick as rope, sealed in plastic. "It's not human, Dan. It's never been human." The pattern was clear now. Every war zone, every forgotten skirmish. These things weren't just waking up, they were being drawn to blood, to chaos, to war, feeding on it, growing, and every government in the world knew. They just lied about it. They always lied. I went back through my mission logs from Kandahar, ones I had secretly saved against orders. One image stood out, a satellite photo of the cave system. But I looked closer this time. Not one cave, not 2, 13. And every one of them was connected, not by terrain, by symmetry. Perfect geometric alignment, a grid spanning thousands of miles. Ancient, deliberate, a network. And the creature we killed, that wasn't an anomaly. It was a scout, a sentinel, a guard dog. We hadn't stopped anything. We'd only opened the gate. 2 months passed. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Henderson's face, his black eyes, that twisted smile. I knew what I saw wasn't a hallucination. One night I woke up to footsteps on my porch. I grabbed my pistol, crept to the door, and opened it fast. Henderson stood there, or something wearing his skin. He looked pale, sunken, hollow. His lips moved like he was trying to speak but couldn't form the words. Then, in a voice that didn't sound like his, he said, "It's not over, Dan. They're calling." Before I could react, he collapsed. I rushed to him, but he was ice cold. His pulse was shallow. I dragged him inside and locked the door. That night, he muttered strange things in his sleep. Not English, not any language I knew. Just that same guttural clicking I'd heard outside my cabin. By morning, he was gone. Not dead, gone. The front door wide open, no tracks in the snow. Just a single word carved into the wood outside. 7. I didn't know what it meant then, but I would soon. After Henderson vanished, I started getting emails from an encrypted address, each one with coordinates, old military photos and names I didn't recognize. One document stood out, the Sleeper Protocol, an unofficial program buried deep in a Cold War-era intelligence archive. It claimed certain soldiers, like us, had been exposed to something in Kandahar. Not just trauma, but a kind of signal, a biological imprint. The creatures weren't just watching us, they were infecting us. Not like a virus, more like an awakening. According to the files, once exposed, a soldier could begin to receive things, dreams, messages, even physical changes, sleepwalkers, whisperers, precursors to possession. I thought it was crazy. Until I woke up one morning with dirt under my fingernails and no memory of leaving bed. I set up cameras, reviewed the footage. At 2:33 a.m., I stood up from bed, walked outside into the forest barefoot, and stood still for 3 hours, staring at nothing. And I was smiling. That night, the whispering came back, louder than ever. But this time I whispered back, and something whispered inside me. I drove for 3 days straight. The coordinates in my final message led me not to Kandahar, but to Wyoming, deep in the Bighorn Mountains. Remote, quiet, cold. I found it in a clearing, a stone circle half buried in snow, pulsing with warmth. As I stepped closer, I heard that familiar sound again. Breathing, deep, ancient. I stood at the center and waited at exactly 3 Hologay. The ground shifted. The stone opened. A stairwell descended into darkness. I went in. It wasn't a cave. It was a temple. Walls etched with symbols older than language and murals of giants walking among men. One image showed soldiers, modern like us, bowing before a massive figure. And at the end of the hall, I found a door. Not wooden, not stone, something alive. Like skin stretched over bone. It opened without a sound. Inside stood a being, not the Kandahar giant. This one was taller. Radiant, eyes like stars behind black glass. It didn't speak. It just raised one hand. And I understood everything. The giants weren't invaders, they were returning. This planet had been theirs before us. And now they were waking up because we had called them. Through blood, through war, through fear. The world had always belonged to them. We were just squatters. And now the landlords were coming home. I woke up outside the stone circle at dawn. No cave. No murals. Just snow. But the message had been burned into my mind. The 13th gate opens soon, so I write this not as a warning, but as a confession. We saw one giant in Kandahar. There are thousands more. And when they come back, we won't be fighting a war. We'll be witnessing a reckoning.